Well, welcome to the One Table Podcast. Thank you for joining us here again. If you haven't subscribed to this channel, subscribe because you will never miss a conversation. But as we are One Table, let's get to who is around the table having this conversation. I myself are Justin White, also known as Juice. We got Pastor Fred Michaud, Pastor David Godwin. We got Chris House, a.k.a. House. And we are talking today just about, why don't you just take it away, David? Take away the topic.
Yeah. So at the time of recording, we are approaching Memorial Day. And so around this time, questions of patriotism come up, especially in the Black community, I know, and maybe some other minority communities. And then even just in the church, as the phrase Christian nationalism has kind of surfaced and has been, in the public square, people talking about Christian nationalism. And so we thought it would be a good time to have a conversation around Christianity and patriotism. And so I guess considering the time, considering the holiday, the first question just presenting to the group is, what are your feelings, if any? Do you have any feelings around holidays like Memorial Day, like Veterans Day, like 4th of July, even like Thanksgiving? Do any national holidays that are uniquely American, where we celebrate America and patriotism tends to be high? What do you feel about those holidays? How do you feel? What are your reactions, gut feelings at those times?
You got it, Juice.
All right. I mean, I would say two things. The first being, I would say I feel patriotism. And I think of C.S. Lewis's book, I want to say it was The Four Loves, where he talks about patriotism as like a love of home, a love of a way of life, a love of your culture. And I think the word he uses is not aggressive. Like, we'll defend it if it's being attacked, but you can love your culture, your country. English people love tea and crumpets. I like coffee and donuts, right? Like, they can have their thing, celebrate their country, have patriotism, and I can have patriotism at the same time. And I want to say he quotes the Greek saying that what is it? A man loves his city not because it is great, but because it is his. And just this idea that I love America, but I don't have to gloss over the flaws in our nation in order to celebrate it. I think it's a privilege to be a part of like this brave, audacious experiment with freedom and democracy. And I just want to leave it better than when I got it. And I'm sure we'll talk about it, but when it comes to patriotism, I often think of Jeremiah 29, where God's people are exhorted, work for the benefit of the place where I've carried you into exile, right? It may not even feel like home at first, but work for the benefit of that. Work for the benefit of where you are, because that city will prosper and you will prosper. And so I'm sure we'll get into it. That's the first thing. I feel patriotism. Then I also feel conflicted because, like, as you said, for Black Americans, it hits different. I don't know what percentage of the American population. I think it's like 15% of our American population were carried here in exile, in slavery, to help build the nation. Right. So I'm just cognizant of the fact that the day hits different for other people too.
It hits different. Okay.
And I'm sure we'll get into that.
Can we agree that it's not fair that the lead person quotes C.S. Lewis?
Right. I mean, you had a whole C.S. Lewis. You got Bible in there. He went deep.
We got nothing.
I mean, but yeah, just even if it's just surface level or as deep as Juice went, like, how do you feel when, Memorial Day comes around, 4th of July?
Yeah, I would say, like Justin, I feel a sense of patriotism. My generation and my family, the Michauds, my children are the 10th generation of Michauds in Virginia. Every generation before me has served in the military.
Wow.
So my dad was in the military. My dad's brother stormed the beaches of Normandy, survived. So I do have a deep sense of patriotism. I have a deep sense of gratitude for the sacrifice of others. I will say, though, that for my own journey, that has been all that I felt. But I would say over these last couple of years, this personal journey that I've been on, I still feel that, but now what's added to that is a sense of anger and frustration that those freedoms that I enjoy are not readily available for all people in our country, and that those freedoms that men and women have paid the ultimate price for, I don't think they died for those freedoms to be given to just some. I think they gave their lives because they wanted those freedoms to be for all people and in our nation, and to some degree for the world, right? Because in some conflicts, you're fighting for the freedom of other people. And so I would say what's added to that sense of patriotism, I would say it does not dilute it. It does not compete with it or displace it. I have two feelings, right? That both are present. And then that second one again is anger and frustration.
Yeah. What about you?
Oh, you want me to go? When it comes to patriotic holidays, I've never really been too big on them. Just haven't. Growing up as a kid, you don't really know any better because it's so ingrained in you in public school. I mean, you have to start every day with the Pledge of Allegiance. Like, it's ingrained in you that America is this great place. So when you have holidays that celebrate America, everybody's supposed to be excited about it. So it wasn't probably until my high school, college years where I kind of was like, when you start learning the truth, when you start learning the truth of America and America's history, you start, why are we romanticizing this stuff? So it created a bit of I'm not really too keen on celebrating it. I mean, we'll have the cookouts and we'll, get the day off of work. But as far as like, hey, America, like, never been that guy. Just for a number of reasons. But not really too patriotic. Because most of, if not all of the wars that were fought for, especially like Memorial Day, not Memorial Day, but people celebrating who participated in the armed forces, especially the black people that were allowed to, even the fact that we had to say allowed to be in the military, they were segregated amongst their ranks and all that stuff. And even after those wars that they fought and died in, they still weren't given the same benefits as their white counterparts. So you would go and fight in a war to protect this American freedom, but then come home and still be treated like a second-class citizen. So, like, I can't pledge my allegiance to a place that never has pledged allegiance to me as a black man. And celebrating patriotic holidays would be a kind of oxymoron to that. So, I'm not really too big on those.
Yeah, I think I'm somewhere in between what everyone has said. I think growing up, I didn't really feel deeply about, patriotic holidays. It was kind of just like, it's the day we got off of school and we get to see fireworks or get to barbecue, or it's the day the pool opens or whatever it is. And then I think same as you, Chris, it was like high school, college, kind of learning more about American history and even just, current events. And I started to get this conflicting sense of, like Juice was saying, I want to celebrate where I am, but at the same time, I feel conflicted. The prophetic kind of edge in me feels conflicted about who we are as America. And so, around the patriotism question, a lot of the times, the way that I kind of process it, and I've been thinking about it, is that
Your time's up. The bell's
over. Hey, Juice had quotes, citations. For me, I think in general, my relationship with America is I'm so grateful to be an American, even in thinking about the times we're living in now with the pandemic and thinking about the fact that vaccines are readily available for us. Like, if I were living in another country, like, that would not be the case. The freedoms that you talked about, democracy, right? I'm so grateful to be an American, but I'm not always proud to be an American.
That's
and
good.
I think that's the conflict for me, is that there's a lot of pride that is connected with these holidays. And I think I'm cool with celebrating the fact that, thank God, for all of these privileges and this grace that I have for being in this country. But I'm not always eager to co-sign everything that America has stood for in history. So
wow, that's well said. And I think it was similar for me, where it was like, as you just begin to learn history, you realize, oh, for some people, they might experience this differently. Like you talk about your grandfather. My grandfather's name was Wilbur. And there was a black soldier who shared his name. It was Wilbur Little, who came. I mean, there's a whole list of black people that came back from war and then either were, discriminated against or lynched. And Wilbur Little was one of them in Georgia for wearing his uniform.
Wow.
Was lynched. Like they wanted him to take his uniform off because in this back home, coming back from war, it wasn't so much seen as virtuous as it was a threat. I forget, it was like a senator or governor of, I think, Mississippi, who was like, it's good that they've been fighting under the flag and they've been doing all these things, but now when they come home, we're just a couple steps from having to basically respect their rights, like the ability to vote and all these things. So just being mindful of that. I mean, not across the street, across the water in Norfolk that same year, there was a celebration celebrating.
That's what you talking about.
You want to talk about it?
Are
you talking about the same thing? The celebration for black soldiers coming home? Let's turn into a race riot.
GI Bill and stuff. Yeah. John Rankin. Yeah. Sorry to interrupt you.
No.
It just came to me who you talking about. Yeah.
And then, I mean, we were talking about the arts at church last week when we had a spoken word in service.
Right.
And I always think about there's one by Propaganda called 20 Years.
Yeah.
That just opens your eyes to, July 4th, these celebrations might hit different for different people. So if you've never seen it, watch it. After you've watched this.
Right.
After you've liked and subscribed this. Then go over there and like that. Right.
And I think that's the tension, right, that we're all saying we feel is we have this deep sense of pride for what it should be and could be.
Right.
And then we have this feeling of disappointment and frustration because of what it isn't. And then we even get more angry when we realize why it isn't when what it could be. And the answer to that is racism, right? And so it's because of something that is ugly and avoidable is robbing us as a nation of what we could be fully.
Yeah.
I think, sorry, go ahead. I've been talking a lot.
No.
I was just going to say that you celebrate the fact we're in a democracy, we can do something, and yet you're mourning the fact that we're not there yet.
That's really good.
Yeah. And for me, as a black person, there are different things that I choose to celebrate in the statement that you said, because I can't point to any time in America's existence where there were any freedoms for all, especially freedoms for black people. I mean, when the Constitution was written, when things were written, black people weren't even viewed as full people, as full citizens. So it's almost like the question that we toss around of racial reconciliation. Well, when have we ever been reconciled? So it's hard for me to look at what America could be, because America has only been a place of oppression for people that look like me.
Yeah.
But I do celebrate, but in that I celebrate the victories that people that look like me have been able to be in this oppressive place and still create places of have been able to deal with the cards that were dealt and made, lemonade out of lemons. So it's celebrating overcoming not being able to vote, but now voting, overcoming being, redlined, but now having neighborhoods where you can build your house and make it big. So, celebrating, having a black president when before, we couldn't vote. So yeah, I celebrate those victories, but it's never a thing of look at what America has done. Look at what we've done in America, because America hasn't dealt with fully its sin of racism. And I think that's at the root of, it's the foundation of the country. So it's hard to celebrate anything country, look at America, because when you look at the root of it, from my perspective, it's only been a place of oppression and a place of, you can do this, but we can only keep you this far.
Right.
So that whole, what it could be, I don't know what it could be, because it's only been oppression. So that.
Yeah. Were you going to jump in there?
I'm going to say mine because I realize it fits into one of the other questions.
Okay. Well, maybe
I'm getting ahead of myself.
Yeah, I probably did too, but
no, it's all good. I think that all of that is good, and it lays a foundation for people, watching, to know that there is a spectrum. Not everybody, everyone watching this falls somewhere on this spectrum when it comes, and probably people further on this side and people further on that side. When it comes to holidays like this. And so hopefully an aspect of, what people feel at home was just expressed, but then hopefully it's being broadened. So I guess given all of that, right, that there is a spectrum, that there is not just this full, all of us have expressed that, even in our patriotism, there might be some conflict. How do we deal with that as Christians, knowing that our country has not been perfect? Maybe we can even talk about whether or not our country is Christian. Can we pledge allegiance to a country that falls short of the kingdom of God? And where, as Christians, should our allegiance be? Should it be in our country? Should it be only in the kingdom of heaven? How do we balance our allegiance in that way? Or do we balance it? Maybe we can. It's both and.
How do you define allegiance?
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's part of the question, right? Like you brought up having to pledge allegiance to the flag in school. And when you're a kid, it's just like, you don't even know what the word allegiance means, right? And it's just kind of, what you say.
Yeah, I think a good definition of allegiance means that you are promising loyalty to something or someone at the expense of giving allegiance and loyalty to something else.
That's good.
Meaning that I'm committed to you in a way that I'm not committed to someone else.
It's exclusive.
So exclusivity is a perfect word. So marriage to me is a sacred form of allegiance.
Yeah. I
give myself to my wife and her alone and no one else. So I think in thinking about Memorial Day weekend, when we talk about the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag, we're promising ourselves nationally to America and not promising ourselves to another nation. Not that we don't respect other nations or admire and so forth and so on, but our allegiance is with America. I think that's what it means when we say I pledge allegiance to the flag. So I know for me personally, I do the pledge allegiance when there's an opportunity. If I'm in a setting, I put my hand over my heart, and I participate in the Pledge of Allegiance, because for me, I personally believe that you can have different kinds of allegiances. Me doing the Pledge of Allegiance doesn't compete with my marriage. I have an allegiance. I have an allegiance to you three as three of my closest friends, right? We don't just work together. We're friends with each other. Our families are friends with each other. But that doesn't compete with my allegiance to my wife and to my family, and it doesn't compete with my allegiance to my country. Yeah. And so I use those as examples of, I don't believe that my allegiance to America, because this is the country I'm a citizen of, competes with my allegiance to Christ. And if ever it did, then in that moment you have to choose which one is more important, right? And so for me, that will always be Christ. Yeah. If for some reason I have to choose between the three of you and my wife, I'll see you later, right? You know what I mean? Right. I mean, so I think you do have to prioritize those allegiances. I think that is important. So that's me on that.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm pretty sure I have. But I'm pretty sure me and Fred are probably going to be on the opposite sides of this topic.
So maybe
we don't sit that way on purpose. We're not sending you a secret message.
Get you arm wrestling.
My response to even that is, I know you just used the analogy that you could think of at the moment, but in my question and comment is, marriage is an ordained biblical covenant.
Sure.
Where in the Bible does it say that we must be loyal to a country? Mm-hmm. So that's part of my response and my answer. Right. But the other part of my response and answer is, again, it's hard for me to pledge my allegiance to a place that, again, doesn't reciprocate that totally. It's oftentimes met with more resistance than acceptance. Also, I was going to say about pledging allegiance to the thing with the way American patriotism has been viewed is through the view of a lens of this country is perfect and you cannot criticize America, and if you criticize America, you're unpatriotic, and how dare you do that, especially if you're a Christian.
Somewhere else.
Especially if you're a Christian, and if you don't like it here, get out. Well, message, none of us were originally here anyway. Even people who are Caucasian.
Fair
you
enough.
came from other countries. We
That's
all
good.
were immigrants at some point. Some of us came by choice. Some of us were brought without a choice. But we all were immigrants. If we trace our lineage, none of us were really born here. So this land is not ours anyway.
Yeah.
So when you the issue I run into is when you criticize America, especially if you're a Christian in the Christian church, when you criticize America, now you're against God almost.
Sure.
And people view their Christianity through an American lens. So when you criticize America, now you're criticizing God. And that's not the case at all. And I don't think there's room for that because we've been so ingrained to believe that God or that America is a Christian nation, that America is God's chosen Christian nation. We're made to believe America is the greatest. No one else is better than us. We're supreme than everyone else. So that's where my issue with allegiance, because when you ingrain that allegiance into people, I'm better than you in every way. I'm better, so I'm pledging my allegiance to you. If you're not like us, you're different, and we don't really rock with you like that. You should be esteeming to be like us because we have this and we have this and you don't have and you don't have. So that's what American patriotism has ingrained in a lot of us. That just look at even the Pledge of Allegiance, the songs, God Bless America. God is always entrenched in it, but is he really entrenched in it?
Yeah.
Is he really? Mm-hmm. Because when you wrote the Declaration of Independence, you would have included black people in that. Like the national anthem. You wouldn't have anything about no slave or no hireling will even be free after this war. That's basically, I'm paraphrasing what it's saying. If God was really in it, but I think we've allowed that to be a part of the American DNA, almost to indoctrinate us to mean when you say American, you're saying God. Mm. So anytime you criticize America, now you're criticizing God. And God we trust is on our money. Mm-hmm. God Bless America is our song. Stand beside her and guide her with a light that shines from above. Really? Right. Like, is that really true?
Yeah.
And so that's why the whole pledging allegiance thing, I can't do it. One, because I don't see anywhere in the Bible where God tells me I have to pledge allegiance to a country. Mm-hmm. Like, where? I don't have to do that. And if I don't, that doesn't make me not love God. Yeah. But again, because we've conditioned Christianity to be American. Mm-hmm. Or American to be Christianity, both. When you criticize it, and now you're going against God. Sure. And that's not true.
It sounds like just getting back to definitions, when we talk about allegiance, I'm hearing you kind of express it more like loyalty. Mm-hmm. And then, Chris, it sounds like for you, especially in connection with things like the Pledge of Allegiance, there's this, attached to that loyalty is this identification, right? That as I pledge allegiance to the flag or America, it also identifies me as American and therefore maybe even better than other countries.
Right. And just loyalty, there should be some reciprocation of loyalty, just like for example in marriage. Yeah. If I'm loyal to my wife, she's loyal to me back.
Right.
I'm not the only one being loyal, and she gets to pick and choose when she wants to be loyal.
Yeah. So that's there's loyalty in your definition. Yeah. What about you, Juice? Do you?
Hey, can before we get to you, I want to just this question about is it in the Bible, because I don't want to miss that. Right. I think
I have some thoughts on that too.
Yeah, no, I think it is in the Bible by way of the human experience that God created and designed, because it was by His design that He created nations. He created ethnicity. Mm-hmm. This is part of the human experience by God's creation. And so is there a verse in the Bible that says, give this promise to fill in the blank? I don't think that there is, right? We know that there's not. Right. But I believe there is a lot that is implied in Scripture by way of God's intent for the human experience by virtue of what He created. And so I think He made room for us to identify with our country by virtue of the fact that He created countries. Mm-hmm. And so I think for me personally, that was, God created that because there's something enriching and fulfilling by having a tribe.
Yeah.
But I agree with Chris, we have to be careful about, we should not equate allegiance and patriotism to marriage, right? I compare it by way of understanding, but I'm agreeing with you completely. This one, marriage is far more sacred than the other. No question there.
And I think we honor God being the creator of America and being the creator of us being able to be here. But I think we often fall into a trap of we start worshiping the created, the one that created, just like the worship. For some reason, I always give y'all the worship analogy just because I'm a worship guy.
For some reason.
Surprise.
For some reason, we oftentimes, and even myself, sometimes we fall into the practice of worshiping worship.
Yeah.
Sure.
We worship and not worship the one who created worship.
Yeah.
And I think kind of in this, it kind of can go that way.
That's
Instead
good.
of worshiping God for giving us this place of tribe and family, we now worship what he's given us. We've made it a graven image now.
Yeah.
Now we made it an idol.
It becomes idolatry easily, doesn't it?
And that's why I equate
That's
oftentimes patriotism with idolatry, because it's like.
And I want us to get to that because I think, there is a difference between patriotism and nationalism. Maybe there isn't, but that's where we're headed. But did you want to say anything in terms of? I
guess kind of in response to both.
Do you do the Pledge of Allegiance?
Yeah. And I would say I see it as you do. Like, there are things that transcend that, though. Like, again, your marriage, God transcends all of it. Even just reading this week with Saul and Jonathan in the Old Testament, like, Saul's his dad, so you got the family ties there. He's the king, so you got the patriotic ties there. And yet when what Saul told Jonathan to do didn't line up with God and God's commands, that's what transcended everything else. That was his ultimate loyalty. Yeah. So that's how I see it. And then also just with the whole, if you don't like it, get out. Again, if I love something, I'm gonna butcher the quote, but what did y'all might even know, James Baldwin said, "I love America so much that I'm gonna criticize her perpetually."
Right.
Yeah.
Perpetually. I know that's the word.
I thought he was going to say James Bond there for a minute.
I was like,
you can't. You quote C.S. Lewis and James Bond in the same.
But it's funny because when people say if you don't like it, get out. Yeah. In 4 or 8 years, when the pendulum swings, if you don't like it, are you going to get out? No, because we love the country.
Yeah.
We're going to stay here.
It's why we criticize it so much.
Right, because we love it.
Yeah.
And again, not to compare it to marriage. You just said don't compare it to marriage. But again, if you love it, you're loyal to it, you're going to work in it. And I feel like that's part of the Pledge of Allegiance. Not that it's perfect. Yeah. But that I have roots here, so I'm going to work to better our society.
Yeah. I just was can I read some Bible?
Do it.
Because you mentioned this earlier, and I had it in my notes. Jeremiah 29, and we all know Jeremiah 29:11, right? But what's ahead of that, this is a letter that the prophet Jeremiah is writing to the Israelites in exile. So in the Old Testament, I think part of the confusion is that in the New Testament, there isn't this relationship with a nation or a land that there is in the Old Testament with Israel in their land. But this is what the Bible, the prophet Jeremiah says that God says to Israel when they're not in their land. It says, the Lord of heaven's armies, the God of Israel, says to all of the captives he has exiled to Babylon from Jerusalem, build homes and plan to stay, plant gardens and eat the food they produce. It goes on to say, to basically make babies multiply. But then it says, and work for the peace and prosperity of the city where I sent you into exile. Pray to the Lord for it, for its welfare will determine your welfare. And so there is a sense of our responsibility, no matter where we are in the world as Christians, to want to better the nation that we're in. I think, and it glorifies God in that way. And part of what we're talking about is, well, how do you better it? Sometimes, does that mean that you just are complicit in everything that it does, or that you're rah-rah, a cheerleader of it all the time? Sometimes it is that you challenge it. And then it gets into Jeremiah 29:11, where it says, I know the plans I have for you, to give you a future and a hope. And so for me, that's where the tension comes in, right? There is this expectation of dual citizenship for Christians, that where we are in the world, we have to be real about where we are and do our best for the best of where we are. And yet at the same time, appreciate the fact that there is a future hope, a future kingdom. Like we're being restored into a nation, the kingdom of heaven that is better. And so, so I do think that there is this dual citizenship that we experience as Christians, that we're supposed to feel like we're in exile. We're supposed to feel like there's conflict. But as we're feeling that that tension, trying our best to better that place. And sometimes it looks like a little more prophetic, and sometimes it looks more patriotic, maybe. But maybe let's talk about this patriotism, nationalism thing.
Yeah.
So I think that's, Chris, maybe some of what you're bringing up is that patriotism in America tends to lean more towards nationalism.
Can you define those terms?
Yeah. So, I mean, I have my own definition of what nationalism is. Patriotism, I think we've been talking about, right? It's this allegiance, it's this loyalty to country. I think nationalism gets more into what Chris was talking about before, about identity and identifying so strongly with a nation that that you're unable to separate it from yourself. And as Christians, that's problematic, because we are supposed to bring a prophetic edge to wherever we are.
Yeah.
So if we're seeing that, if we're saying that as Christians, my Christianity, my identity as a Christian and my identity as an American is one and the same, or somehow equally kind of merged, then it causes problems, because there will be times when our Christianity and our Americanity, our Americanness, right, they butt heads, and we're going to have to show allegiance to Christianity above and against our
Right.
American identity. So I don't know. How else would you guys explain nationalism? Is that a good definition? Do you agree with that definition?
Yeah, well, before y'all get into it, just reading the definition of nationalism.
Oh, yeah, that's good.
Identification with one's own nation and support for its interests, especially to the exclusion or detriment of interest of other
That's good.
nations.
Like above all. That's what
Above all.
Yeah.
Yep. I just wanted to give the dictionary definition
Yeah.
in case somebody needed it. But go ahead. I don't want to dominate it.
So
I think it gets complicated.
yeah.
Right. I mean, I think what we're saying is we're not going to tackle. We're not going to solve these
The world's problems right
in this podcast, right?
Right.
What?
Because I do think at some point, when you're talking about foreign policy, when you're talking about international economic policy,
Sure.
at some point you are pursuing what's in America's best interest. When we're going into a trade deal, we want everyone to benefit. But I think it's okay to say, I want the better deal. I don't feel like that's wrong necessarily. When you're going to buy a car or buy a house, right, you want the better deal. Mm-hmm. So I do think there is an element of you've got to make room for wanting to benefit. I think that's okay. For me, I think where it crosses the line is that you want it at the exclusion of anybody else benefiting in any way.
Right.
When you want all the benefit for yourself, right, that becomes parasitic.
Right.
When I think what healthy nationalism is, it's symbiotic. We're going to have relationships with other nations, and we want those nations to benefit as well.
Right. But even in that, you had more?
No.
Okay, I didn't want to cut you off. Then the issue that I take with this nationalism, yeah, you want the better deal, but as we said, not at the expense of another nation, of others. And I think that hasn't necessarily been the case. It's been we want the best deal, but that's because we live in a capitalistic society that's about power.
Yeah.
And power, we don't exhibit our power unless we dominate. And you dominate is all me, none you. So because that's how we run our country and our situation, it's all us, and we'll use you. And we'll make friends with you if it makes more for us.
Right.
Yeah. And if it doesn't make more for us, then we're going to disassociate ourselves.
Which is more empire than it is democracy.
Right.
In a bad way.
Yes.
Yeah.
And because we're in a capitalistic society, wherever the money is, that's where the power is.
Yeah.
And patriotism and nationalism it's hard to not say those two words without thinking of power. Yeah. It's about power. And when it's just like the car example that you use, if we both go into a car lot, and of course I want the best deal, but if I know that I want the best deal, but if I know that you're trying to get the same car and your needs are different than mine, and I know that I don't have to have this, I'll defer to you so that you will be able to get the car. It's kind of like the equality versus equity conversation that we always have. It's more about equity, making it what's fair and what's profitable for everyone, even if that means that I'm not the one on top. And in America, I don't think we share that sentiment. We don't share that. We say freedom and justice for all, but there's always going to be a majority that's going to be a part of that all, which then doesn't really make it equitable for everyone. So that's where we run it. That's where the thin line is how do you, the nationalism, all about our nation and none about yours. That's where it gets tricky, but we associate that with patriotism. So and the last thing, I would be in total agreement with patriotism if it was told holistically, if the true stories were told and everything was told truthfully. Then it would be no problem with, and even the bad stuff. It's not that me as a black person is bitter about the bad things that happen to black people in America. It's the fact that America is choosing to not acknowledge it nor repent from it, and
or even be honest
and act
about
like it didn't happen. You know, that's where the tension is. That's why I can't pledge allegiance to you. I can't, because again, you haven't pledged allegiance to me by telling the truth of what happened. If we celebrated, the things that happened in the wars and how powerful our military is, but also were very honest about how segregated those same military places were, and that it shouldn't have been segregated, then maybe me as a black man might be able to, honor the military more. But
So I think that's good at laying the definition of patriotism and nationalism. I think what we've established is that even though we define those two terms differently, there is a thin line, and it is tricky. It's hard to know where the line is or how close to the line you are, and that's why, honestly, for me, that's why it's difficult for me to be patriotic, because I always want to err on the side of I don't want to get too close to that line. And so while I want to love where I live, and I want to honor God by loving where I live and being grateful for where I live, I don't ever want to get too close to that line to where my patriotism becomes idolatrous.
Okay.
But I guess the follow-up question is, it happens though a lot with Christians in America. There is this term Christian nationalism, especially in recent years, that has come up in the news, on social media. Why is Christian nationalism a thing? What about America maybe, or what about Christianity makes it so that our patriotism is so tied, or our affection for our country, our nationalism is so tied to this religion for some people? What do you guys think?
I mean, in my mind, it's not just an American temptation. It's an ancient one. Yeah. I mean, the idea of nationalism is we want it to be mutually beneficial, but you get pride, you get sin involved, and it becomes about me and mine's. Yeah. And you think about like when Satan tempted Jesus at the outset, right? He's like, I'll give you all the kingdoms of the world, meaning you can have all the government, all the legislation. This is how you set up your kingdom.
He's like, already have them.
Right, right. And Jesus' reply is, no. He quotes scripture, I'm to worship and serve God alone. Yeah. And he separates those two. But the temptation is always to intertwine them, where our worship gets tied. Like you were hitting on earlier, our identity, even our worship gets so tied up in the nation we're in. And I think that's why so often in Christian nationalism, we're in a two-party nation, right? Where we start tying our Christianity, when it becomes so tethered to our worship, you tie it to a platform, you tie it to a party. And it's that same mistake of thinking that God's kingdom is going to look like our human kingdom, or like Jesus could be bought, right? And again in the Gospels, the mob wants to make him king by force, and we still have that same inclination.
Wow. Yeah, that's good.
It gives me pause that one of the main reasons why the religious leaders of Jesus' day did not recognize him as God was because of their allegiance to their country that God created and called his chosen people. Right. So it just gives me pause.
Yeah. Continue in the Gospels. The one time Jesus is like in the presence of the Roman government, he's been bound and dragged there to Pontius Pilate. Wow. which is just what I would, like January 6th of this year is the image I got in my head where people were carrying, flags of that said Jesus and crosses to the Capitol to protest. And it's like,
right. Like, and that's the image of Christian nationalism, right?
It's been the striking image definitely this year.
Yeah.
The trigger point, lightning rod, whatever you want to call it.
Right.
I mean, I do think one of the reasons why they are intertwined is that this nation was created by people who were seeking religious freedom. I think it is, again, the hypocrisy there is that we murdered and stole it from the indigenous people, right?
Right.
Yeah.
We conquered because of we were fleeing persecution, so we persecuted others so we could be free. Right, hypocrisy, right? Freely admit that. But I do think one of the reasons why it is intertwined is because the founding of America was because Christians wanted a place to come to practice Christianity without being oppressed and to practice a form and a version of Christianity that was free from a state religion, right? Coming from England and the Church of England, right? They wanted a church of their own that wasn't overseen by a government. So I do think that it's intertwined to some degree because of the history. We can't escape our history. Right? We can rise above it and overcome it. But I think that is one of the reasons why it's intertwined to a degree.
Yeah. You have anything to add to that? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great point. You're talking about the origin of it, which sheds a bright light on how it was. But even in that, I think even there was supremacy and power. Even in that, we're escaping that,
and even maybe even Christian nationalism in that,
like manifest destiny, like
right.
Because
we're coming over here to be able to worship freely, but when we get over here, we're going to make everything over here do it the way that we do it, because our way in our minds is the supreme way, and it's the best way of doing it, and it didn't make room or allow room for other expressions and other ideas. It was our way or the highway, and with that, I also think that I don't know how I can articulate it the best way, but I think that American Christianity has played into the game of politics. Like when you think of things like Nixon and Reagan with the moral majority. They were like, if we can get the church on our side and make this a political issue make these issues political more than actually caring about humans and the decency of human life, quote unquote, whatever. Once that bait was thrown out and the American church took it, it's like you can't get rid of it now.
And we need to do that podcast.
You can't get rid of it.
Political parties.
And that's how it got tied to it. And now it's like a bond, and now it's almost like a bond that can't be broken.
Right.
But
it's like, so I think that's a big,
With that, you mentioned Nixon I think of Billy Graham, who was kind of used as a mouthpiece by Nixon. And it was like in his, I think, autobiography, towards the end of his life, he looked back and regretted. He said he would have steered clear of politics. Now, I don't think that's the conclusion.
Right.
If I'm going to love my neighbor, we're going to do justice.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's what he meant.
Sure.
But looking back in his life, he's like, man, I would have steered clear, because it's so easy to use the Lord's name in vain. Like, using the Lord's name in vain isn't just about saying Jesus after you stub your toe. It's like, it's politicizing it. It's
for using,
I think Billy Graham realized he got used.
Exactly.
And he continued to minister to presidents. But he said, I'm not taking a side politically here.
Right.
Yeah.
And also, too, I think when it comes to the way, like we talked about in other podcasts, the way scriptures are interpreted, if you have white men that are using the scripture to dominate you, you control the narrative. So then, and when you're a white voice telling people, hey, you have to do this because the Bible says this, as a white person, you interpret it and you manipulate. I mean, scriptures were manipulated to oppress people. And when you use the scripture to do that, it creates like a staple, like this is what God says. And when all of the voices that are preaching and giving Christianity to America are white voices, when white voices are elevated and you have no prominent black voices speaking to Christianity, to the nation, then you get to control the narrative. There's no way that if there were, in Billy Graham's day, if there was another black voice just as prominently elevated that it would have, I don't think it would have turned out that way. But because Billy Graham was the most exalted, elevated one, and he was the picture of Christianity, it was like whatever he says, it comes out of the box. God said it, so that's how it works. I'm using him just because that's what we're talking about. Right. But there are other notable evangelists and people of the faith that are faces of the faith, but they were white men, because there's no way that the way that a white preacher interpreted and even preached the gospel in 1800 was not the same that a black preacher would preach it from. Right. So when you get to control the narrative, and then politics gives you the bait, and you take the bait, and now they've hooked you, now you control the narrative. But if there were more black voices or other voices that were non-white majority, I think that we may not be in the place where we are now, where Christianity is so tied to the allegiance and nationalism. Yeah.
There's a long history that goes beyond even just America, goes beyond the slave trade, of Christianity being used by government to endorse things that are unchristian. I think, like, at the time that the Bible was written, at the time that, you just mentioned Jesus, right? When he was in the presence of the Roman government, he was crucified by it. And so the relationship between Christianity, the church, and state, Christianity and the government in the early days up until the 300s was all, the church was persecuted. But then comes Constantine, then comes, kind of bringing in, endorsing Christianity. And then there becomes this kind of mutual, beneficial relationship between the church.
Martin Luther comes along and says, hey, that ain't right.
Yeah, and then, but then Calvin and Martin Luther both kind of complicate it. So there's a long history of, even I think about Augustine and just war theory, and how the intention for him was to write an ethic that was supposed to mitigate and help prevent wars, or to make wars more just. But even that, became something that was manipulated and used by governments to endorse war unjustly in unchristian ways. So I say all that to say, I think the thing that makes me sad about Christian nationalism, and I think the reason why it's so important that Christians should be, if we don't feel some sort of conflict in us when we think about our patriotism, we should. I think it's important because historically, Christianity has been used for secular reasons, for the reason of the government, to do things that are just unchristian. And we have to be careful that our allegiance is always God first, right? To that kingdom of heaven first, above our country. And I think a lot of Christians have been bamboozled into thinking that this really is a Christian country, and always has been, and our morals have always aligned with Scripture, when really it hasn't. So,
or that it used to be, and we've gotten away from it, right? No, that's what I was going to say earlier. One of the reasons why the campaign slogan, Make America Great Again, is so offensive to me is because it implies that there was a time in our history that we want to go back to. Yeah. There's not a time in our history that if you are a devoted follower of Christ, there should not be a time in America's history that you want to go back to. Yeah. Because the further back you go, the more oppressed people are. Yeah. So that's part of where I think that's part of the trap of Christian nationalism is the better days that we want to recapture. And we should not want to recapture those days.
I think maybe that's why, we ask the question, why is Christian nationalism coming up? Why is that a term that's being used right now? I think that's the answer to the question. We're feeling this shift, this post-Christian shift in America, in a different direction than moral majority. And I think that there's a subset of Christians that really do genuinely believe that we need to go backwards because it was Christian. And I think we have to do some soul searching, some digging into history to see whether or not that's true. But Chris, you were going to ask.
No, I was just going to say, I think to your point of being exposed to the reality of America's history and why so many Christians, especially white Christians, may feel like, this is the right way, this is the only way. Maybe it's because, like, as we're kind of the purpose of us all being here, have a place of diversity, different voices, that they are actually living life in, exposed to be able to give them a different perspective. Because when you grow up in a place where, you only hear of it being one way, it's hard for you to even conceptualize that this may be different. There may be something wrong. Because it's just my belief. It's hard for me to believe that an adult in America could believe that America is a perfect nation if they have people of color in their life that they actually communicate with, because you would see and learn that their story and perspective is different than yours, and it would make you question, well, why is that? So it would kind of declutter your one-way mind of thinking. So I think it's a challenge to everyone in America to have diverse circles that you talk with, so that you don't, so that you aren't deceived by ignorance, and by ignorance meaning you just don't know any better. Because if you're only around one person, like we always use, echo chamber. If you're around people who think and say the same thing, then you'll think that that's the only way.
Yeah. So maybe we can just end with this question. Given all that we just said, all that we just talked about, people at home might be asking the question, well, then what should our relationship be with government, right? What should the church's relationship be with government? Should the church be a place for patriotism? Given all these red flags, given all this tension, right? What do you guys think?
I'll jump in.
Let's go
and I'll just kind of wrap in closing thoughts too. Part of my allegiance is born out of what I believe it can be, right? So I had a great conversation some time ago with a dear friend, Jure, who we all know. And we were going back and forth about whether or not we pledge allegiance to the flag, and her pressing me helped me get to a place that I had never articulated before, and which was I pledge allegiance for what I believe it could be one day. So it's aspirational for me. And so I do believe that there is a place for patriotism. And let's be right, we're not just talking about America. There's Christians all around the world who are citizens of other nations. We're saying, I'm saying, be a patriot for the nation that you are in. And but it doesn't mean that you are aligning with what's broken. It means that you are, for me, I think it's we're hopeful for what could be better. So I do think that it's more than appropriate for churches to be a place where we are patriotic if we're in the country that we're in. When I go on a missions trip to wherever, I'm not there to celebrate America, right? Because I'm not in America. I'm there to honor and respect their country, right? Yeah. So that's where patriotism becomes nationalism, right? In an unhealthy way. And then the other thing I'll share is, just as a closing remark, I do believe that America was God's idea. And I do believe that the Declaration of Independence and the Bill of Rights, that's part of God's design because of the religious freedom that's possible here. And so I do hold firmly to this belief that God created this nation for the good that it is capable of bringing to the world. I'm a huge fan of local church. I'm aligned to Christianity. There are a lot of people out there who misalign Christianity, but I'm not going to abandon my passion for the local church because there are a lot of idiots out there defaming it, right?
Sure. Right.
So I align myself with America for what I know one day it can be, and I acknowledge there are a lot of people out there misrepresenting it. But I'm not going to let their sin and their hypocrisy steal from me my belief and my hope that one day America is going to be able to bring to the world all that I think God intended it to bring, which is liberty and freedom.
I'll keep mine short. I personally, I think every nation was God's idea.
It's a holiday weekend. People have time.
Yeah,
so you keep going. They got Monday off.
They got time.
I think you're stealing my answer.
Oh, no, I was just going to say briefly, I think every nation is God's idea. And I do think that
Yes.
that there's some unique things like democracy that we get to celebrate in America that touch some aspect of who God is, because all of us were created in His image. And
so good.
So every culture, every nation is going to have some aspect of who God is. And therefore, we should humbly, as Americans, as Christian Americans, be embrace, and I think this is kind of getting at what you're saying, be aspirational in the things that make us uniquely American and that overlap, if we were to do a Venn diagram of what also makes us Christian. And so there is overlap. I mean, I think that could be maybe a patriotic place that I operate in as an American, is finding that overlap between where I am or who I am as a Christian, and then who I am as an American, where they overlap, and then the places that don't, being prophetic in those areas and doing my part. I think, the question, what should the relationship between the church and the government be? I think the church's role in government should be that it has a prophetic voice, that it challenges the government to look more like the kingdom of heaven. Yes. And
Nathan to David, right?
Yeah. And so and then I'm gonna put a little shout out book.
Do it.
Book recommendation. But this book, Onward, by Russell Moore, is incredible. It's really easy to read. Russell Moore is someone I love to follow on everywhere. He's got a podcast, he's got Instagram, but he was the president of the Ethics Commission for the Southern Baptist Church. No longer is. That was recent. He now is doing something for Christianity Today.
Yeah. What's your other one? You got another one?
This book is really great at engaging the culture without losing the gospel. He really talks about what it means to pledge allegiance to Christianity first, and then to America. And then this other one is a little more heady and like academic, but Christ and Culture, it talks about the spectrum of the Christian's relationship or Christ's relationship to culture. And it spans all the way from, Christ for culture or Christ of culture to Christ against culture. And so because there's biblical evidence and arguments for that whole spectrum. So that's a really good book, Christ and Culture by H. Richard Niebuhr. Came out a long time ago, but if you want to deep dive into that theology, it's there. So,
what are your books, Chris?
I said I was going to be short.
I'm coming at the end. I'm going to give my book suggestion.
Oh, you're going to get some books off the shelf. But now, you guys kind of already echoed this idea of there's nations all over the world where Christians are that are, patriotic in terms of loving their country. And even you look into the past, the early church in Roman culture, and the cry to the early church in Revelation 18 has come out, right? There's the imagery that we can spend an entire podcast on in Romans 17, Revelation 18 says come out, like come out of that way of life and the worship. Like early Christians in Roman culture were known as atheists because they would worship Caesar as Lord. No, Jesus and Jesus alone. Like they weren't just dying in, being martyred because they worship Jesus, it's because they would only worship Jesus. And again, this tethering of our worship with the nation we're in, and just the reminder that we got to be set apart. And I always try to remind people, like, set apart isn't talking about like your position on a map. It's about the condition of your heart.
Wow.
And you can be set apart and still active in politics. Again, if we're going to love our neighbor, do justice, right, seek the benefit and welfare of where we're at, you can't just let go of politics because it's frustrating. Yeah. Like politics affects people. God loves people. We're called to love our neighbors. So we have to stay engaged, whether that's called a pledge of allegiance or it's just staying engaged where you're at for the benefit of where you're at. I don't even know if that answered the question, but that's what I'm just going to walk away.
I think it did too. I guess I'm closing it out. I think our good friends, the AND campaign, Compassion and Conviction.
Friends. We want to be friends with them. AND campaign, if you're watching this, give us a call.
Friends, Justin Gibney, Michael Ware.
Come on.
They've written an amazing book, Compassion and Conviction. The AND campaign's guide to faithful civic engagement.
So good.
And what Justin often says, even before starting his podcast, is always like, make sure you get your Bible here and get prepared to not think like a Democrat, not think like a Republican, but think like a Christian. Yep. And I think that's the thing that we need to do regarding, government and our Christian faith. is to see it through the lens of Christ before our political affiliation lens. And I think if we do that consistently across the board, I think we'll see a lot more change, and we'll see a lot more equity, and we'll see a better relationship with politics / government and our Christian faith.
That's good. Good conversation, y'all.
Yeah.
Hey, just off-topic shout out to my son Ethan.
Hey,
Killed in 2.5-foot water moccasin in our garage
with his bare hands, like David.
America.
Speaking
of,
with an axe,
Like David did.
With an axe, I wasn't home to save his mother and his sister.
Wow.
Man
You
award.
dice it up and make it look like your mug.
Man award. Yes. Yes.
Best
So
music for the mug
shout
today.
out to Ethan. ITAC, our family code of manhood. So.
There you go.
That's awesome.
Cool, man.
Well, guys, thank you for the conversation, for the time. And as always,
Yes.
like, subscribe,
Share it. Tell somebody.
Share it.
Yeah, man.
And we hope to see you at the table next time.
What?